They ordered me to move my boat on water that's been in my family since the 1950s. Celia Whitmore, the HOA president, looked me dead in the eye and said my rights didn't matter, but she messed with the wrong legacy. I bought the rest of the lake and banned her entire fishing club for good. She tried to erase my history. Instead, I erased her power. If you've ever been disrespected like that, don't blink. This story only gets better. My name is Travis McKnight, and it all started on a morning I'll never forget. I was coming back from my daily ride across Larkhaven Lake, the part of the lake my family had owned for generations. The hum of the boat's engine sliced through the still water, but when I spotted Celia Whitmore, the president of the Ridgeway Shores HOA, standing on the shore, something in my gut twisted. She was there, waiting for me, her commanding presence making it clear something was off. "That boat's gotta go, McKnight," she said, her voice sharp with barely contained anger, like her patience was wearing thin. "You think you can just do whatever you want out here?" It wasn't a question. It was a heavy accusation, dripping with disdain. "Either you get that boat off the water, or I'll make you. And when I say make, I mean it." She spoke with the arrogance of someone who doesn't know boundaries, someone used to giving orders without being challenged. But in that moment, I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. I took a deep breath and stared at her, trying to wrap my head around how someone could have so much nerve. To Celia, I wasn't someone with rights to this place. To her, I was just another nuisance to be dealt with. "This part of the lake is mine, McKnight," she went on, her tone even more biting. "You don't have a claim here anymore. You're in my way, and you're gonna have to leave, one way or another." She wasn't just ignoring my rights. She was trampling them. And worse, she made me feel like I was the one in the wrong, the intruder, on my own land. The contempt in her voice only grew as she kept talking, each word a calculated attempt to crush any resistance. "I don't have time to deal with you and your boat, McKnight," she said, stepping closer, almost daring me to push back. "If I were you, I'd start thinking about the consequences of being so stubborn. You know what happens when the HOA decides something's not gonna fly, don't you? I'm not exactly known for my patience." Her threat was blunt, no sugarcoating, and I could feel the weight of her words like chains trying to hold me down. She paused, eyeing me with the look of someone who'd already decided what she was going to do and was just waiting for me to admit defeat. "You can try to fight this, but it's going to be harder than you think," she continued, her voice lower now, laced with a venom that seemed to seep into my skin. "I always get what I want, and I'm going to make you realize this place isn't yours anymore." Her words cut like a hot knife, each syllable burrowing into my mind, trying to make me doubt my right to be there. "You think you can stop me? You've got your boat, your land, but I've got the power here," she said with a cruel smirk. "You're not just losing your boat, McKnight. You're losing your dignity. Because in the end, it's the HOA that's going to decide what happens to this lake, and you'll see how, before long, there won't be any room for what you think is yours." She wasn't just talking about the boat. She was talking about my family, my history, my land. She wanted to destroy it all, and she did it with a calculated coldness that made me feel the hatred pulsing in her words. The anger started to boil over, and I knew this wasn't just a casual conversation. She wanted to humiliate me, to make me feel like I had no control, no voice. "I'm not going to stand here listening to you any longer," she said, already turning her back, as if she'd already won. But her final words hung in the air, heavy. "Choose wisely, McKnight. Either leave now, or I'll make sure you're gone for good." I didn't know exactly what she had planned, but the threat was clear. She was willing to do whatever it took to force me out, and it was in that moment that something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about a boat or a piece of the lake anymore. It was about standing my ground, about not letting someone with so much arrogance and cruelty erase everything my family had built. I couldn't back down, not to her, not to anyone. Celia started walking away, but her last word echoed in my mind. "I always win, McKnight," she shouted over her shoulder, her tone a challenge that made me feel like I was being backed into a corner. But I wasn't a man who went down easily. I knew what I had to do, and she'd soon find out that when you mess with the most precious thing someone has, there's no turning back. I was going to fight. After years of grinding away in Austin, I finally decided it was time to step back, take a deep breath, and rest. The cabin my grandfather, Lyle McKnight, built on the south side of Larkhaven Lake had always been my escape. When he passed, I left the chaos of the city behind and came to this piece of land that had always been a symbol of peace. There was nothing out here but the sound of the water, the birds, and the feeling that I was finally home, free from the pressures of modern life. but that peace didn't last as long as I'd hoped. My grandfather always said that lake was a sanctuary, a place that would be passed down through the generations. He guarded what was his like a lion, always telling me our family had a rightful claim to this piece of the world. When I came back after selling my company, I felt a connection to the past, like his spirit still lived here. There was no luxury, no flash, just the simplicity and strength of nature. And that cabin, that land, was all I had to call my own. But the peace wouldn't hold. The rest of Larkhaven, the side of the lake that once seemed untouched by big developers, was now being swallowed up by the expansion of the Ridgeway Shores HOA. What used to be a small, secluded area was turning into a sprawling community of villas and condos. A neighborhood that once had charm and respect for nature was now overrun with luxury developments, all controlled by the HOA. The lake's shores were being fenced off, and the idea of tranquility was slipping away. Celia Whitmore was the mastermind behind it all. While the residents of Ridgeway Shores bought up properties and transformed the area into an upscale enclave, she was always at the helm, deciding what could and couldn't happen. She had control over the growth, and that was what she craved most: total dominance. And my cabin, my piece of land, was now in her crosshairs. She wanted it all. And if she couldn't get what she wanted through legal means, she'd use the weight of her position to take it. The thought of losing what was mine seemed absurd. I'd grown up here. The lake's waters knew me like an old friend, and now Celia and her HOA felt like an invisible threat taking shape with every new high-rise and villa that popped up. Every lot that was sold was a piece of my memory being erased. Every time she talked about new developments and expansion plans, something inside me twisted. It was like she was destroying my family's legacy, as if this little piece of history was worth less than what she called progress. But what pissed me off most was the way she carried herself, like she had the right to decide for everyone, like it was a universal truth that everyone should fall in line with her vision. She didn't know how to respect legacy or tradition. To her, it was all about power, about expanding her empire. And here in this place, I felt like she was trying to erase the last thing I could still call mine. Celia's threats were subtle but constant. It wasn't just about the boat anymore. Now she wanted control over everything around Larkhaven. And the more she pushed, the more cornered I felt. But I was done being patient. I had a choice to make: let her take what was left of my inheritance, or do something to stop it. And as the late afternoon sky painted the lake in shades of gold, one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let her win. Amid the growing feeling that I was losing something fundamental, I started digging through old files and records. The cabin my grandfather left me, with its cozy simplicity, also held secrets I knew I'd need to uncover to defend what was mine. In an old drawer, among papers yellowed by time, I found the deed my grandfather always called his shield. That piece of paper, though aged, held the power I needed. It was proof that this part of the lake, with its calm waters and peaceful shore, still belonged to our family. When my fingers brushed the edges of the deed, something inside me sparked. Here was the undeniable proof of what I'd always known. But now, more than ever, it was critical. The deed clearly outlined our family's rights to that stretch of water, an exclusive access to the lake, the right to recreational use, and, most importantly, the shoreline that gave us control over that specific area. The boundary line was drawn with precision, like a shield against anyone who'd tried to take what wasn't theirs. What shocked me was realizing that Celia, with all her arrogance, had no idea this document existed. She and her HOA had moved forward with their developments, fencing off and buying up land around the lake, but the part where my cabin stood was untouched by them. I held the last deed proving our sovereignty over this land, something not even Celia's influence or money could just wipe away. But at the same time, I knew this wouldn't be enough to make her back off. She wasn't the type to give up. I felt like a hunter with a rifle in hand, ready to strike, but I couldn't act recklessly. I knew Celia wouldn't abandon her plans without a fight, and she wasn't easily intimidated. Once she realized I held the final obstacle to her takeover, I knew she'd stop at nothing to undermine my defense. But I was done hiding or waiting passively. From that moment on, I knew everything we did next would be a silent war. But there was something I still didn't fully understand. What did Celia really want? She wasn't just buying land or expanding the HOA. She wanted all of Larkhaven, and that piece of the deed, still firmly in my hands, was the only thing standing in her way. And it was in that moment, as the sun's rays began to fade behind the mountains, that I realized I'd have to fight harder than I ever imagined to keep my inheritance intact. Celia had the resources, the strategy, and apparently the support of everyone around her. But I had something she didn't: the legal right to that land, documented and protected by a deed. And despite all her power, she couldn't just ignore that. The game was about to change, and her plan, which seemed so easy, was about to get a lot more complicated. I went to Orville Jenkins, a retired fisherman who spent his days watching the lake, and what he told me made my blood boil. Celia Whitmore, with her position of power, was using the lake in a completely illegal way. She'd allowed the Birch Hollow Anglers Society, a local fishing club, to hold tournaments on my part of the lake. They were doing it without asking permission, without any respect for the rules or someone else's property. The worst part was knowing that to her, this was just another extension of her control over everything around her. Orville described the secret meetings and events Celia organized, charging entry fees and selling merchandise like the lake was hers. "She's treating this place like public property, Travis," Orville said, his voice bitter. "And you, my friend, are being disrespected in ways you can't even imagine. They're out there for weeks, and she doesn't even care." With every word, the anger inside me grew. Not just because of the direct invasion of my territory, but because of the way Celia acted. Like other people's rights were meaningless compared to her own interests. The idea that a bunch of people were using something that was mine without any consideration left a lump in my throat. I knew the fishing club itself wasn't the problem. It was how Celia was using the situation to turn the lake into a business. It was manipulation disguised as community fun. And worse, she was using the club as an excuse to keep taking what was mine, like it was her natural right. What infuriated me most was that she was doing it at my expense, and no one seemed to question it. At every fishing club meeting, Celia played the gracious host, leading tournaments and using my stretch of the lake without any consent. The worst part? She did it without paying a dime, like the lake was public property. "This is our tradition here, Travis," she'd said once with a smug grin. "I'm just keeping things the way they've always been." It wasn't about tradition. It was about money and power, and she was turning the lake into a commodity. I tried confronting her directly about it, but her look was pure disdain. "What do you want me to do, McKnight? Go to the cops and cry about a fishing club? That's ridiculous," she said, almost laughing. "You're late to the game. If you can't see what we're building here, that's your problem." She dismissed me like I was nothing, like I had no right to challenge her actions. But it wasn't just the fishing club. It was her arrogance, the way she ignored any sense of boundaries or respect for the people around her. The tournaments kept going, more frequent by the week, and I felt more and more isolated. The anger in my chest grew every time I saw the fishermen, their nets and lures scattered across my part of the lake, acting like I was the outsider on my own land. They fished like the lake was theirs, like my stretch of water had no value anymore. But I knew the value wasn't in the nets or the lures. It was in the history, the legacy, and they were erasing it with every cast into the water. I knew sooner or later I'd have to put an end to it. Not just to protect what was mine, but to show Celia she didn't have the right to act this way. When she challenged me, smirking and mocking, I made a decision. The Birch Hollow Anglers Society would never come back. I wasn't going to let her keep destroying what my family had left me. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. She'd started a war, and I was ready to fight back. I knew Celia wouldn't stop there. Every day, she seemed to push further, and my space on Larkhaven was becoming a distant memory. Not only were the fishing tournaments getting more frequent, but the pressure on my part of the lake was intensifying. I had to act fast. So I called my friend Fiona Dorsey, an environmental lawyer with an unbeatable reputation. She knew Celia's tactics and exactly how to gather evidence. The first thing we did was set up discreet cameras around the area. Fiona, with her legal expertise, knew the best way to fight back was with hard proof, and Celia wasn't going to slip away from the truth. When the first camera went up, the feeling of watching every move gave me an odd mix of unease and calm. Now, I had something I could use against her. It was only a matter of time before she fell into her own trap. Weeks passed before the first recordings came in. Footage of fishermen entering my stretch of the lake. No permission granted, using the waters like it was their private playground. Some even tried fishing in the more protected area, where rare and vulnerable species lived. The violation was blatant. It was an invasion disguised as casual recreation, like owning the lake was just a matter of who showed up first. But I wasn't going to let it slide. Fiona and I spent nights reviewing the footage, noting the exact moments the fishing club crossed boundaries with no regard for limits. The evidence was there, captured on video, showing Celia and the fishermen's constant presence. Every move was a violation of my rights. Every snapshot of the water polluted with lures and nets made my stomach churn. I couldn't fathom how Celia could act so naturally, like she had the right to destroy everything around her. I knew the pressure on me was mounting. It wasn't just the physical presence of the fishing club. It was how she and her HOA were trying to erase what was left of my life, my legacy. During the days we pored over the videos, we also dug into other parts of the lake she'd already taken. Small plots of land, like mine, that had been swallowed by her greed. She was building a web, and with every new piece of land she claimed, the noose around me tightened. With every new piece of evidence, my frustration turned to rage. Fiona, always calm and methodical, seemed more determined than ever. "She's not getting away with this anymore, Travis," she said one night, as we watched a clip of Celia overseeing another tournament, oblivious to the damage to the local ecosystem. "We've got everything we need to take her down." And with those words, I knew the battle was about to begin. This wasn't about staying quiet anymore. The war against Celia's HOA was officially on. As we pressed forward, I started to realize that what Celia was doing went far beyond simple trespassing or negligence. She was weaving a web of control, with the help of local officials, that stretched across all of Larkhaven. With every new encroachment we uncovered, a sense of helplessness gripped me. How could I stand up to this? Celia was so well connected, with so many powerful allies, that victory seemed impossible. But the anger inside me was growing, and I knew I wasn't going to be defeated so easily. Fiona and I knew the only way to stop this was to act strategically, with undeniable evidence. And with that evidence in hand, I was ready to make the move Celia never saw coming. When the time was right, she'd see that her grip on Larkhaven wasn't something she could just seize without a fight. When the day of the HOA meeting finally arrived, I was ready. I knew it would be a head-on clash with Celia and her crew, but the confidence from the evidence I'd gathered gave me strength. I walked into the meeting room with Fiona by my side, and every eye turned toward me. The air was thick, the tension palpable. Celia, already at the front, shot me a look of contempt, as if my being there was a mistake. But what she didn't know was that the mistake wasn't mine, it was hers. "Ladies and gentlemen, Travis McKnight," Celia began, her voice dripping with arrogance and ice. "I wonder what he's doing here." She flashed a fake smile and turned to the HOA board, trying to pin the blame on me before I could even speak. "I hope he knows we're all here for the greater good, for a stronger, thriving community." Every word was like a veiled jab. She knew she had the upper hand, but she had no idea my patience had run dry. I asked to speak, and as my voice filled the room, all eyes were on me. "I'm not here to make friends, Celia," I started, firm and steady. "I'm here because you and your HOA are trying to take what doesn't belong to you." The room went quiet for a moment, but I pressed on, knowing the truth was on my side. "The recordings you made of our activities at the lake, the fishing club invasions you authorized without even consulting the landowners. It's all documented. I showed the videos, the logs, the photos of fishermen using my part of the lake. I knew this was the last thing she expected. Celia tried to cut me off, but I didn't let her. "Here are the documents proving what you're doing," I said, placing copies of the deed and evidence of the trespassing on the table. "And here's the list of violations your HOA committed by illegally taking what's not yours." The words came out with fierce clarity. For the first time, I felt like I was in control. But as I looked at Celia, I knew the battle was far from over. She wouldn't back down so easily. She glanced at the evidence, then turned to the other HOA members, her face red with rage. "This is a complete waste of time," she said, nearly shouting. "He doesn't know what he's talking about. This is about community, about progress." She tried to spin the narrative, acting like the victim, like she was the only one who cared about the area's future. But everyone knew what she was up to. She was just trying to tighten her grip on power, and now it was being exposed. I took a deep breath, feeling the anger burn in my chest, but I stayed calm. "What you're doing is a crime, Celia," I said clearly. "You can't trespass on private land and treat it like it's yours. I'm not the only one here standing up for what's right." The room was dead silent now. Everyone knew I was right, and even though Celia tried to push back, the evidence was against her. When she tried one last time to challenge my authority, I realized she'd already lost the fight, not because of a legal win, but because she'd lost respect. The HOA board was now looking at her with suspicion. I knew this wasn't the end, but something inside me told me she'd just lost the trust she'd worked so hard to build. The room was divided, and for the first time, she didn't seem so invincible. The game had shifted. After the showdown at the meeting, word about Celia's actions started spreading among the HOA members. But the real bombshell came when Fiona and I uncovered something no one had suspected: Celia's plan for Larkhaven. She wasn't just trying to expand the HOA. She was working with Summit Haven Realty to turn Larkhaven into a gated resort, complete with luxury cabins, an exclusive marina, and even a floating restaurant. What seemed like a simple land dispute was actually part of a much bigger vision, a dream of total domination. I went to City Hall, where I found the initial sketches of Celia's project. The plan outlined a high-end tourist complex that would take over the entire lakeside. Every shoreline, every piece of land that was once part of our heritage was slated for villas and hotels, all to attract wealthy tourists, far removed from what this place meant to the families who lived here. Celia wanted to turn our last bastion of simple living into an artificial paradise, accessible only to those willing to pay. The most shocking part, though, was that she believed the lake was already 100% hers, that everything around it should belong to her. At the HOA meeting, she talked about the good of the community, but in reality, it was all about profit. To Celia, the roots of this place, the history of the families who lived here, were just insignificant details. To her, this land was a golden opportunity, an investment she wasn't willing to lose, no matter who she had to crush to get it. I stood there in silence for a moment, trying to process the enormity of what was happening. Celia, with her meticulously orchestrated plan, no longer saw Larkhaven as a home, but as a chance to turn something simple into a luxury market. Every step she took, every word she spoke, showed she was willing to erase any trace of the local community. History, legacy, none of it mattered to her. What mattered was profit, power. "She's going to swallow this whole place," Fiona said, looking over the documents and plans. "She's got money, influence, and the ability to bend anyone who tries to stand in her way. You're trying to fight an empire, Travis." Fiona's words weren't a warning, but a realization that we were dealing with something far bigger than a simple land dispute. I was being pulled into a power struggle where the rules weren't clear and the stakes were sky high, and that's when I made my decision. If Celia wanted to control everything, I'd have to be smarter. It wasn't enough to just defend what was mine. I'd have to think bigger, act faster, and be bolder than she ever imagined. This wasn't just about my piece of the lake. It was about taking her control away completely. And to do that, I'd have to do something she'd never expect. The moment I'd been waiting for finally arrived. After days, weeks, of analyzing every move Celia and her growing empire made, I knew it was time to act. Fiona and I had gathered every piece of evidence we could, and now we had what we needed to hit back. We secured a court order to shut down the biggest fishing tournament of the year, which Celia was using to show investors how she was managing the lake. The event was about to start, with dozens of fishermen ready to invade the area and once again ignore my rights. When we arrived at the scene, it looked like a big party for the local elite. The marina was packed with yachts, and the fishing club teams were gearing up for the tournament. But instead of the peace that once defined this part of the lake, there was only a sense of oppression, as if the whole event was a display of power. I could see Celia up front, overseeing everything, that smug smile on her face like she owned the place. But she didn't know that smile was about to be wiped away. When the sheriff's siren blared, the chaos was instant. The authorities stormed in, and I knew the surprise was complete. Celia tried to protest, her expression shifting to rage. "What is this, McKnight?" she shouted, trying to pull herself together. "You think you can just stop everything? This is a legitimate event." But her voice sounded desperate now. She wasn't in control anymore. The court order we'd secured had stopped everything, and there was nothing she could do. The idea of being publicly challenged was tearing down her facade of power. I walked up to her, staying calm, but with a certainty that seemed to radiate from every step. "This isn't just an event, Celia," I said firmly. "This is a violation, and you know it." She tried to interrupt, but the sheriff handed her the documents, making it clear there was nothing left for her to do. The tournament was officially canceled. The look of fury she shot me was almost tangible. I knew in her mind she was already scheming to turn the tables, but in that moment, she was defeated. "You think this is over? This was just a piece of it, McKnight," she said, her anger spilling over. "You don't know who you're dealing with." But I didn't flinch. She could yell, she could threaten, But what she didn't know was that I'd taken the first step towards something much bigger. Every word she said only fueled my resolve to keep going. From that moment on, she wouldn't be the one calling the shots. The residents and investors who were there started to scatter, seeing that the charade Celia had built was crumbling. The fishing club, which she treated as the heart of the community, now looked like a symbol of trespass and manipulation.
Those who thought they were there for a prestigious event were walking away, realizing the truth was finally coming to light. Celia's dream of turning everything into a luxury resort was starting to fall apart, and she couldn't deny it anymore. That's when I realized something crucial. I wasn't just fighting for a piece of land anymore. I was fighting for something much bigger, for the respect she and her HOA had tried to strip from me, for my family.
And for the local community that had been ignored and disrespected. She had no idea what was coming. Everything she'd built so carefully was starting to collapse before her eyes. "This isn't over," Celia said, still trying to salvage some dignity. But as she saw the looks from the residents and investors, she knew her victory was turning into defeat. I'd struck back, and now she knew she couldn't ignore my resistance anymore. She'd started a war, and when she least expected it, I was going to see it through. The event was canceled, and the day she thought would be a grand triumph became her public downfall. I knew this battle was far from over, but I also knew I'd taken the first step in the right direction. It wasn't about who had more power or money anymore. Now, it was about who was right, and I was ready to keep fighting for it. The news spread like wildfire. By the next morning, the scandal was all over the local headlines. Caleb Voss, an investigative journalist with a nose for the juiciest stories, published a scathing piece. HOA used private property like it was public and profited, the headline screamed in bold letters. The article laid out how Celia Whitmore and her HOA had manipulated the fishing club, using my property's waters to make money without permission. Her hypocrisy couldn't have been clearer, and the public didn't take long to react. Celia, who'd always been seen as the community leader, was now being painted as the villain. Caleb's investigation revealed she'd lied about the property's status, pretending the lake was for public use when, in reality, my family had rightful ownership. The community was outraged. Residents who once saw her as a powerful figure started questioning her integrity, and the pressure on her grew. No one wanted to do business with someone being exposed like this. Her response was quick, but fueled by anger and desperation. "This is nothing but an attempt to undermine what we're building here," she said at a press conference, her face tight and eyes burning with hate. "This lake is a symbol of progress, and anyone trying to discredit our vision is just trying to stop our community's growth." But her words, once so confident, now rang hollow. Investors pulled back. Residents started eyeing her with suspicion, and Celia's leadership was hanging by a thread. Then came the real shocker. The fishing club, which she'd always called the soul of the community, turned against her. Members started distancing themselves from Celia, realizing they'd been used for her personal gain, and soon the club lost its credibility. What was once a prestigious institution became a symbol of manipulation and disrespect. The very thing Celia thought was her strongest asset became the catalyst for her public downfall, and the worst was yet to come for her. The media pressure was relentless, and the public, which once saw her as untouchable, now demanded answers. The scandal she'd tried to bury was now out in the open, and there was no hiding anymore. Celia, who thought she had everything under control, was now facing the true power of the community. She was no longer the mighty HOA president. She was just a defeated woman, desperately trying to salvage what was left of her reputation. With the scandal exposed and the pressure mounting, Celia's empire began to crumble. She tried to fight back, but she knew there was no way to keep lying. Soon, investigations dug deeper, and the truth she'd tried so hard to hide came to light. Charges of fraud and document forgery were filed against her, with clear evidence that she'd manipulated records to make it seem like the lake belonged to the HOA. Things got even worse when the state started looking into her actions. The HOA members who'd once stood by her side started bailing. Many feared the legal and financial fallout of supporting someone so deeply tied to illegal practices. The support Celia thought she had vanished, and her control over Larkhaven slipped away. The pressure was overwhelming, and soon her resignation was announced. But even after she stepped down, the shadow of the scandal lingered, and the stain of fraud and abuse of power would never fade from her story. I knew this wasn't just the end of Celia. It was the end of the HOA as it existed. The distrust she'd sown now tainted everyone around her. The community was fractured, and residents were starting to see how much they'd been manipulated by someone posing as a community leader. Celia's power, which once seemed unstoppable, was now in ruins. She'd pay for her actions, not just legally, but in the heart of the community she'd once tried to control. With her gone, I decided the next step was to act decisively. Using the funds I'd saved over the years and the support of other residents who were as fed up as I was with Celia's manipulations, I started buying up the land around the lake. My purchases weren't just about securing what was mine, but about ensuring no one like Celia could exploit the community again. Larkhaven would finally be a protected place, free from the threat of being turned into a luxury resort for the few. The moment I finalized the purchase of the remaining land, Larkhaven stopped being a symbol of conflict and became a symbol of resistance. Celia had tried to destroy everything my family had built, but now I had full control. The house my grandfather built, the lake's shores that had been threatened, they were now safe under my ownership. Not only had my family reclaimed what was ours, but the local community had a chance to be what it always should have been, a place of peace, respect, and belonging. And so, with the purchase complete and the last piece of land under my control, Celia Whitmore's story, the woman who tried to destroy our family's legacy, came to an end. The HOA was dismantled, and the empire she tried to build on lies and manipulation crumbled before her eyes. Larkhaven was now truly mine, and I knew from then on, things would be different. No more exploitation, no more deceit. The lake's future would be built on the respect and legacy my family always held. After buying Larkhaven and restoring what my family had lost, I made a tough but necessary decision. I had to ensure nothing like Celia's scheme could ever happen again. That's when I created the Larkhaven Watershed Trust, a conservation project that, beyond protecting the local ecosystem, would prioritize restricted access to the area. The lake, which once seemed at the mercy of whoever had the power and money to buy it, would now be a safe space, reserved for those who respected its natural laws. But there was one clear, non-negotiable rule. The Birch Hollow Anglers Society was permanently banned. No tournaments, no events, and absolutely no one from the club would ever come near Larkhaven's waters again. The sense of justice I felt making that call was immense. I knew I was being fair to the local residents, to my family's memory, and to the lake itself. I couldn't let the same cycle of exploitation happen again. What Celia tried to do would never be allowed to repeat. The local community rallied behind the idea, and soon the conservation project gained traction. Schools started hosting educational programs about environmental preservation, and residents, once manipulated by Celia, now came together to protect what was truly theirs. The lake, once a symbol of greed and exploitation, became a symbol of resistance and preservation. I felt a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. My family's legacy was secure, and on quiet afternoons, as I walked along the lake's shores, watching the water reflect the sky, I knew this was a definitive victory. Larkhaven was now a sanctuary, free from interference, free from manipulation. I'd taken control, but more importantly, I'd protected something far greater than the land. Larkhaven's future was finally mine, and no one, not even Celia, could change that. Today, as I glide across Larkhaven at dusk, the gentle sound of the water lapping against the boat's hull reminds me of what I lost and what I reclaimed. The lake mirrors the distant mountains, the warm colors of the sunset dancing on the water. I could stay there for hours, soaking in the peace that finally seems to have returned. What started as a fight for my land, my heritage, now feels like a symbol of everything we overcame. The boat, once a symbol of Celia's intrusion and threat, is now a symbol of my victory. It's right where it always belonged. I look at the lake's shores and see what we've done with the Larkhaven Watershed Trust. The project isn't just about protecting the land. It's about giving back to the community what was taken. Kids, once so disconnected from nature, now learn to respect the lake and understand its value. Local families can now enjoy the lake as it always should have been, a place of peace, of belonging, without the threat of a luxury resort swallowing it all. But even with all the calm I feel, I can't help but think back to the confrontation, the threats, and the fight to ensure everything my family built stayed intact. That morning when Celia ordered me to move the boat was the start of it all. How she underestimated our resolve. She wanted to take me out, to destroy what my family held dear. And now, as I look at the boat anchored in the calm waters, I know my response was more than revenge. It was a declaration that you can't erase someone's legacy without facing consequences. Life around Larkhaven has changed. The community is tighter, and the lake, once a symbol of conflict, is now a symbol of renewal. The trees grow greener, the birds sing louder, and the sound of the breeze over the water has become a soft melody that echoes in my soul. It wasn't an easy victory, but it was earned. I gave Celia the response she never expected, but deep down, knew was coming. I look to the future with the certainty that what we've built here, both the community and the lake itself, will be preserved for generations to come. Larkhaven, now free from the threat of greed and manipulation, is more than a piece of land. It's a symbol of resistance, respect, and justice. No one like Celia will ever threaten it again. As I head back to the cabin, walking the paths my grandfather laid, I feel his presence, like he's smiling down, proud of what I've done. Not just for the lake he loved, but for the fight for truth, for what's right. The boat's still there, on Larkhaven, and as it floats in the calm waters, I know somehow it represents the final victory. My family's legacy, unbreakable, safe forever. Would you have the courage to stand up to a corrupt HOA on your own? How far would you go to protect your family's legacy? It's super important that you drop your comment. You won't believe the twist that went down in this other story popping up on your screen. Check it out right now.